Hey, folks, welcome back to the next episode of Kicks Over Coffee. This is going to be a fascinating discussion today. For our FDRA members, we've done some deep dive into LCAs, which are life cycle assessments as part of our sustainability work. And more, I think companies are getting certification of their materials, and the maturation of that, of just getting it certified as an LCA, of actually seeing a breakdown of impacts in a variety of ways. So I'm excited to have Thomas Matiz, who is with Lenzing. Most people know them in our footwear industry by Tencel, which is a great product that many people use to accomplish their sustainability goals. And Thomas, right off the bat, I know that you're a sustainability analyst for the company based in Europe, but maybe you can quickly explain what's your day job and what you guys are looking at there at Lenzing.
Yeah, thanks for having me. What does my day job look like? Of course, we try to use sustainability and the sustainable activities to transfer them into our business, to leverage our business, and of course to tell the story of how the fibers are sustainable and what makes them sustainable. So within our department, we are connecting with all other departments within the Lenzing Group. Of course, on the one hand for communication, and on the other hand also to substantiate every claim that we make. So this is the point where it gets to real data, where we have to use data insights and turn them into our narrative. And that's why I'm actually coming into the play. I'm sort of handling the technical data and trying to translate them into words and stories that our business colleagues can use on the market.
Yeah, that's not an easy job.
No,
It's a lot of stuff, because then you got to know the technical side and you have to know kind of the marketing side, and it's all got to be truthful, right? So
Absolutely.
it's a critical role that you have. So I'm glad you're joining us today. Kind of a case study. We want to look at more LCAs. So first of all, maybe from your perspective, like why are more and more people going to LCAs versus just kind of third party verification of certain aspects of the material? Why LCAs? And then let's kind of get into some of the LCAs you guys have, so people can better understand what you're looking at and what they should be looking at.
So as it turned out, historically, LCA has established itself as one of the tools being reasonable to describe the environmental impacts of a product or a service or an organization or whatever. And during the last, I would say, 3 decades, as I said, LCA became one of the tools on the market, and which was accepted by a large community, and is therefore being used to describe and assess the environmental effects of certain activities. And what we see currently is that also the legislation will use LCA as one of, or as the central tool to being used for such, as it says also in the standard, public assertions, right? So when it comes to marketing, when it comes to products being placed towards consumers, you have to have reliable information in order to prevent greenwashing and give the customer or the consumer the appropriate information he or she needs to individually decide which product is sustainable. Where are the side effects, which are the positive, the negative impacts. And yeah, LCA is one of the tools, the most used tools in that sense. And due to the holistic approach of LCA, as it says, it considers the life cycle of a product. Lenzing was actually using it 12 years or 13 years ago for the first time to assess the products, the fiber products, and consistently being applied for the fiber products, but now also for other byproducts which are being produced in the biorefinery process, for example, such as acetic acid or xylose, like this tree sugar, as it's also marketed. And we build up on that story. We also refined the methodology being used for that, because it's kind of technical. You have to, of course, substantiate which approach you take in, which assumptions you're doing. So we could have been successfully building up on that, and still use it today as the calculation method to describe our fiber impacts, and also convert the results which we get from the LCA, from our LCA studies, to the publicly accessible databases, for example, such as HIGG MSI.
Right.
And this is then in our case the communication vehicle we use to deliver the impacts to our customers.
Yeah. And let's I think it's important, you said something very key there. The legislation is starting to require this. This is, you know, we've been in this voluntary space for many years, and now we're starting to see in the EU with the Green Deal and many other kind of ancillary pieces of legislation that go along with that for implementation and guides, increasingly going to this because LCAs provide this holistic look at product impact. So when we think about LCAs, I'll remind people we're talking about like water issues, we're talking about air issues, carbon impacts, et cetera. So you're looking at all the environmental aspects. You're not just looking at certifying what percent recycled it is or what percent bio it is, but actually what that product's impact is overall. And so for the HIGG side, I know there's been a lot of controversy that has involved HIGG. But in lieu of other systems, and maybe other systems will start to come online, that's still a very useful tool if you know how to use it correctly, right? Like if you're going in there and you're using that to assess different things. I think that the problem has been with HIGG is the marketing side of what's happening. But have you guys still seen that as a useful tool for your customer base to look at what's happening?
Definitely. And it's correct that there has been some criticism, which we actually appreciate, that the limitations were addressed. So that's what we see now, that the SAC is connecting with Dutch and Norwegian consumer ministries and authorities in order to improve actually the tool. But still, it's at the moment one of its kind. There is no alternative, and it's still a really good intention to provide this database where people can get the information from. But of course, the HIGG MSI faces the same limitations LCA faces itself, right? So you just mentioned the environmental impacts in the broad field of indicators, which are now expressed as global warming, for example, for air emissions, or also ozone depletion, which is for other air emissions, but also water scarcity, water pollution, and so on. But still, we have the limitations of, for example, biodiversity, of microplastics release into the environment. This is something LCA cannot address yet, or the approach or the methodology behind is still under development, because there is a lack of scientific basis and knowledge. So that's where we appreciate that there is a debate going on, and there is still the intention to improve.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because I mean, I didn't even know that you pointed out there's a limitation with LCA, and when we were going through this on deeper dives, people were saying this LCAs are not the end all be all of your answers for what you're looking for, but it provides all the clues that you need to make better decisions and get better at what you're doing. So it's not a perfect tool, but it's probably the best tool we have to measure a wide swath of the product's impact. Maybe take us through some of the LCAs you guys have worked on. What is a kind of a main focus of the company right now when you're, I mean, obviously you want to reduce all your impacts as best you can, but from your goal and perspective, what are you most looking at for an LCA? Like what's your target hopefulness in terms of seeing an LCA over time improving? What areas are you looking at? Is it I mean, I think carbon is probably one of the biggest things that everybody's facing right now that's very concerning. And I think a lot of that might be influenced too, again, by the legislation pushes as well. So,
Yeah.
but maybe you can just share what you're seeing in the LCAs that you guys are doing and how you're approaching kind of best practices around that.
Yeah, sure. So as I said, Lenzing initially deployed the first LCA 12 to 13 years ago, which was back then kind of getting the knowledge and understanding how the impacts are, how impacts arise.
Mm.
So um, from that, we actually could gain this knowledge and build up on it, and now actually use LCA or try to apply LCA for as many products as we can. Of course, we have some more priority products like
Right.
fiber products where we make most
Right.
money out of it. There are other products like byproducts which are not as important on the business side, but still there is the request from our customers.
Mm.
Um, so I think we kind of analog to the EU in a transition phase where we apply LCA. But in the future, I think it will be like a safety data sheet for chemicals. It will be something that has to be delivered next to the product. You will not be able to deliver a product without an environmental
Yeah.
explanation.
I've seen that too. It's a digital passport, I think, is something like that.
Yeah,
So,
this is the idea the EU has, for example, the digital
right.
product passport. And on the other hand, so this is the transition phase, and we're trying to apply it as appropriate as possible, which means that already um, we're already trying to substantiate our claims,
Yeah.
right? So this is something the EU will also make mandatory for companies in the future, and th that's what we doing at the moment. Actually, in advance, trying to uh, follow the future requirements.
Yeah.
Because what we see, it's not only the EU, it's also individual states that currently rush forward, such
Right.
as France, for example, which will make things mandatory that are currently being discussed on the EU level. Um, but we are also collaborating with other companies from other states that have other priorities, such as biodiversity, as I mentioned before.
Mm.
So yeah, we try to use LCA as a holistic tool,
Yeah.
as it's supposed to be, um, and for the moment, try to incorporate into our LCA calculation all the measurements we realize and all the new achievements we can get.
Yeah, and I think it's important because what you're talking about there is what we call a patchwork of legislation, right? Like it's
Yeah,
not, it'd be great if there was one overarching piece of legislation and everybody was on the same time frame of implementation and all that, but it's not. And I mean, we're even seeing at the customer level where brands and retailers are increasingly asking for more data. Maybe not at a full LCA level, but they're getting to that point. And I think it's interesting that what you're saying there, and I think listeners really need to dig into this, is the different priorities differ by states, right? Biodiversity, some are carbon. Increasingly, I think water scarcity is going to be one of those things that are rising up, even in the United States.
yeah,
So depending on where you are, there might be a priority differentiation that happens. But the LCA tool allows you to have all that data on the holistic side to move that data for your customers and where you need it to. Um, One question I always do have as an LCA tool overall, I mean, multiple industries use this, but what like is there a we know that they're expensive. We know that it takes a lot of time. And if you do an LCA correctly, it's peer reviewed. So there's this whole process and structure to it. And as you say, the science is getting better and they're adding more things to that. But is there a, do LCAs have a time? Is there an expiration? Do you have to do one every 3 years, or is it something around where your product changes or something like that? What's the, like if someone's looking at an LCA from 2017, is that still valid, or should they be saying we need an LCA every 3 years to look at product?
Yep. So the approach would actually, or the approach that you currently is taking is, for example, that not only the LCA has to come with a certain set of indicators and X kilogram of CO2 emitted, but also with a so-called data quality assessment, which includes, for example, the time frame of data collection or the age of the data. Like when we say there is the study from 10 years ago, the robustness of the LCA will not be as high as a recently conducted LCA, right? Because we can rely on more recent data. And I would actually like to complement what you just said before, that of course LCA requires you to have a certain insight of data, but this is also one limitation, that per se data is not made available if you make an LCA. This is of course one limitation, that data availability is not always there. And in that sense, this is also the approach, as I said, that will come in the future, that not only the LCA results will be communicated, but also the robustness and appropriateness of the data. So was the spatial frame correctly included? Has there been some outdated data, for example, or technological questions?
Right. I think that's important to point out as people think about this too, because that will play a great role, because that was the first thing that I heard of. It was like, there's some LCAs that aren't peer reviewed, and it's like, well, so somebody's just, that's great, but that, we need scientists looking at, what we're doing in the right way. So, so cool.
That's also what it makes it difficult to implement LCA in a broader aspect. Like when we try to simplify complex things,
right?
It's just not possible always to make a short statement out of a real complex study.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I think this is very helpful to help people think about, again, LCAs. And if people want to deep dive, they can contact me. We have a whole, deep dive into LCAs and going through it meticulously. But, is there anything as we kind of wrap up, Thomas, that you want to share about Lenzing's LCAs, or did we miss anything in particular that you want to highlight? Because you're the expert, and I want to make sure that we touch on what you think is important.
Yeah, I would say I can only emphasize the use of LCA. It provides a very, very good framework how such calculations and assessments have to be done. And yeah, I'm happy to invite everybody to look at the HIGG MSI, for example, or approach us directly. We have also some materials available where we explain our approach, where we can also share our results.
Yeah.
And of course, support for product calculations, because fiber LCA is of course only an intermediate product. So you have to know what you do when you like to include those results into the product calculation of a T-shirt, for example. Or,
that's great, because I think that's important, because people need to know that they can approach you guys. You'll give them the data, but you'll tell them what it means, right? Like it's
absolutely
translated. You said at the very beginning, I'm kind of a translator, figuring out the technical and translating it into something very understandable. And two, I think that's the biggest challenge that we have as an industry, is we're looking so much at individual materials, which is great, but like our materials combine with other materials, right? Because footwear is such performance driven thing that you have backings, you have extra stitching, you have overlaps, you have combinations of materials, and it makes it really difficult. I think there was something like the average shoe has 70 different materials and components that go into it. So we look at holistically, it's really hard, but I think it is important because it could, the properties and things like that may change with combinations. And so it's
Definitely.
important that you guys are there to help people look at that and say, hey, it's great that you're using our product. Let us help you use it better, right? And I think
Absolutely, absolutely. And yeah, perhaps the one message I want to give is don't be afraid to do the LCA. That's probably also kind of a supply and demand question. Like if more people, more companies are going to conduct LCAs, then there will be an infrastructure increasing, which probably makes the LCA also cheaper in the future.
oh yeah, that's a great point. Scaling it up and sharing them as well. Like at some point, if somebody's doing an LCA on the same material someone else is using, like let's share it so we can lower that cost and also increase the transparency to our environmental impacts through materials and through production, et cetera. Before I let you go, you're based in Austria. So I think you're the first Austrian ever on Kicks Over Coffee. You have people from all over the world, but
Oh,
coffee,
pleasure.
I'm a big believer in coffee bringing people together, right? My
Yeah,
mentor said, never underestimate a cup of coffee with a friend to learn something new. So I've learned something new today, and I appreciate you for it. But tell me, on an average day, are you a coffee drinker, and how much coffee do you have?
yeah. Actually, I am, and it's now 2:30 here in Austria. So I actually had my 3 cups of coffee, and I'm trying to don't have more. Let's
That's
say
all
it like
right.
that. Maximum
Well,
three cups is my rule.
yeah. Do you in Austria there's like nice, I understand I haven't been yet, I want to go, but there's nice cafes and it's like a very
Oh,
social.
yeah. Vienna is heavily known for their coffee consumption. So we have really nice coffee shops here.
Nice. Well, maybe we can do one of these in person, and I
Yes,
can fly out and
please.
we'll have our computers side by side and do it next time.
Yeah,
So
would be great.
awesome.
And
All right. Well, Thomas, thank you so much for joining us, and appreciate um,
thanks for having me.
Lenzing and Tencel for their support of FDRA and their support of the footwear industry and doing these LCAs and helping people understand them and trying to improve the products. I think that's what that's the difference between a material supplier just giving materials and someone actually trying to solve a problem. And I think your
Yeah.
company did that really well, and we really appreciate that. So, folks, again, this is Kicks Over Coffee. Go back and check out all our episodes. At the very least, you'll hear opinions on coffee. And until next time, keep buying kicks, keep drinking coffee, and thank you very much.